The billionaire's maid spilled wine on him, and one touch changed everything that night. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The alarm clock pierced through the Miami dawn at 5:30 a.m., its harsh beeping echoing off the thin walls of the cramped apartment in Little Haiti. Amara Collins pressed her face deeper into the pillow for just one more second, savoring the last moment of peace before another day began. Another day, another dollar, she whispered to herself, a mantra her grandmother used to say. The words carried weight now. Every dollar mattered when you were splitting rent with your 19-year-old sister, who was more focused on Instagram followers than job applications. Amara's bare feet touched the cold tile floor as she padded to the small kitchen. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mrs. Delacroix next door already starting her morning routine, the familiar sound of her radio playing soft Haitian music. The apartment smelled faintly of the plantains Kira had burned the night before, mixed with the ocean breeze that somehow found its way even to their modest neighborhood. She made her coffee black, cream was a luxury they couldn't always afford, and stared at her reflection in the microwave door. 26 years old, and she looked tired. Not just morning tired, but soul tired. The kind that comes from dreams deferred and bills that arrive faster than paychecks. But today felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the early morning light filtered through their small window, casting everything in gold. Or maybe it was just her imagination trying to make Monday morning bearable. 45 minutes later, Amara stood at the imposing gates of 1247 Ocean Drive, the mansion that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. The Uber driver whistled low as he drove away, probably wondering how someone like her ended up working somewhere like this. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that seemed to capture every ray of Miami sunshine. It perched on the edge of South Beach like a crown jewel, its infinity pool appearing to spill directly into the Atlantic Ocean beyond. "Morning, Amara," called Rodriguez, the groundskeeper, as he trimmed the perfectly manicured hedges. His weathered hands worked with the precision of someone who'd been perfecting his craft for decades. "Morning, Mr. Rodriguez. Looks like it's going to be a beautiful day." "Every day's beautiful when you're grateful for it," he replied with a knowing smile. "Big party tonight, I hear? Mrs. Chen's been fussing over the preparations since dawn." Amara nodded, mentally preparing herself for the controlled chaos that was event day. She used her key to enter through the service entrance, immediately hit by the cool kiss of air conditioning and the subtle scent of expensive candles that seemed to permeate every corner of the house. The kitchen was already buzzing with activity. Ming Chen, the head housekeeper, moved with the efficiency of a general commanding her troops. At 62, she'd been managing households for Miami's elite longer than Amara had been alive, and it showed in every calculated gesture. "Amara, perfect timing," Mrs. Chen said without looking up from her clipboard. "We have 75 guests tonight, including the mayor and several city council members. Everything must be perfect." "It always is, Mrs. Chen." Amara tied her hair back and reached for her apron. "What do you need me to focus on?" "Guest service during cocktail hour. Black dress, minimal jewelry, invisible presence." Mrs. Chen's eyes met hers briefly. "And remember," "I know. Blend into the background, anticipate needs, and never make eye contact unless spoken to directly." Amara had memorized the rules long ago. As the day progressed, Amara found herself polishing crystal glasses that probably cost more than her monthly rent, arranging imported orchids that would be thrown away tomorrow, and ensuring every surface in the mansion sparkled like jewelry under the carefully positioned lights. She paused in the main living room, taking in the view through the massive windows. The ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, its surface catching diamonds of sunlight. Sometimes she wondered what it would feel like to have this view every morning, to wake up to such beauty without having to clean around it. "It's something, isn't it?" The voice came from behind her, deep and unmistakably confident. Amara turned to find herself face to face with Dominic Carter himself. She'd seen him in passing dozens of times over the past year, but never this close, never when she wasn't actively working. He was taller than she'd realized, with dark hair that looked effortlessly styled and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was something magnetic about his presence, not just his obvious wealth, but something deeper, authority maybe, or the kind of confidence that comes from never doubting your place in the world. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, I was just," she started, immediately stepping back from the window. Her appreciating the view, He moved to stand beside her close enough that she caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and understated. I never get tired of it. Some mornings I stand here with my coffee and forget that other people have to look at parking lots and concrete walls. Amara wasn't sure how to respond. In all her time working here, she'd never had a conversation with him that lasted longer than a polite greeting. "The sunset must be incredible from here," she said softly. "It is." He glanced at her, and for a moment she forgot about the invisible barriers that usually defined their interaction. "Maybe someday you'll see it." Before she could process what that meant, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral, but her timing impeccable. "Mr. Carter, the florist needs approval on the centerpiece arrangement, and Amara, we need you to help set up the bar area." "Of course." Amara nodded quickly, grateful for the interruption and confused by her disappointment at the same time. As she walked away, she felt his eyes on her back, and something warm unfurled in her chest. She told herself it was nothing, just a moment of humanity from someone who lived in a world so different from hers that they might as well be on different planets. But as the afternoon melted into evening, as she changed into her serving dress and prepared to become invisible among Miami's elite, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like a door had opened just a crack, letting in light she hadn't expected. The guests began arriving at 7, and soon the mansion filled with the sound of designer heels clicking on marble floors, champagne glasses clinking, and the kind of laughter that comes easy when money isn't a worry. Amara moved through the crowd with practiced grace, offering canapes and collecting empty glasses, while the city's power players networked around her. She was carrying a tray of red wine toward the main salon when it happened. A guest stepped backward without looking, bumping into her elbow just as she turned. The tray tilted, and she watched in slow-motion horror as a glass of expensive Bordeaux arced through the air. Time seemed suspended as the red liquid splashed across an impeccably tailored jacket. When she looked up, her heart nearly stopped. Dominic Carter stood there, wine dripping from his sleeve, his storm-grey eyes fixed on hers. The conversations around them quieted. Someone gasped. Amara felt her face burn with embarrassment as she realized she'd just ruined what was probably a $1,000 jacket in front of half of Miami's social elite. "I'm so sorry," she breathed, reaching instinctively for his arm with her free hand. "I'm so sorry." But instead of anger, instead of the humiliation she expected, Dominic's hand covered hers, gentle, steadying. "It's okay," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. "Breathe." And in that moment, with his hand warm against hers and his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the rest of the room disappear, Amara felt something she'd never experienced before. Like coming home to a place she'd never been. Have you ever felt like your whole life changed in a single second? Amara spilled wine on the most powerful man in Miami, but instead of anger, she found something in his eyes that left her speechless. What now? Can a moment like this really break down all social barriers? Or is Amara deluding herself with an impossible dream? She couldn't stop thinking about his hands. 3 days had passed since the wine incident, and Amara still felt the phantom warmth of Dominic's fingers against hers. She'd replayed that moment 1,000 times, the way he'd steadied her instead of pushing her away, how his voice had been so calm when she expected fury, the look in his storm-grey eyes that made her feel like she was the only person in a room full of Miami's elite. "You're burning the eggs," Kira's voice cut through her thoughts. Amara blinked, realizing smoke was rising from the small pan. She quickly turned off the burner, scraping the blackened remnants into the trash. "Sorry, I was just thinking about Mystery Man again." Her 19-year-old sister perched on their second-hand bar stool, scrolling through her phone with the casual expertise of her generation. "You've been walking around like you're in some kind of trance since Monday. I don't know what you're talking about." Amara grabbed 2 pieces of bread, settling for toast instead of the ruined eggs. Kira looked up from her screen, her dark eyes, so similar to Amara's, sparkling with mischief. "Is he cute?" "It's not like that, Kira. He's my employer." "Well, technically." "So he is cute," Kira grinned. "And rich, I'm guessing, since you work in that mansion in South Beach. Girl, you better shoot your shot." "There's no shot to shoot." Amara buttered her toast with more force than necessary. "We live in completely different worlds. He probably doesn't even remember what happened." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. There had been something in that moment, something that felt too real to be one-sided. 40 minutes later, Amara stood in the marble foyer of the mansion, polishing a crystal vase that already gleamed. Mrs. Chen had assigned her to the main level today, unusual since she typically worked in the less visible areas of the house. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in golden hues that made the mansion look like something from a magazine. She could hear the distant sound of Rodriguez working in the garden, the gentle hum of the air conditioning, and the soft classical music that always played through the hidden speakers. The orchids need water. Amara nearly dropped the vase. She turned to find Dominic standing in the doorway of what she knew was his home office, dressed casually in dark jeans and a white button-down shirt. Without the formal attire, he looked younger, more approachable, but no less commanding. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. The orchids," he gestured toward the elaborate arrangement on the side table, "they're starting to wilt. The purple ones are particularly sensitive to dehydration." She looked at the flowers, noticing for the first time that some of the petals were indeed beginning to curl. "Of course, I'll take care of it right away." As she moved toward the arrangement, she was hyper-aware of his presence behind her. She could feel him watching as she carefully lifted the heavy crystal vase, testing the weight to gauge how much water it needed. "You have gentle hands," he said quietly. The comment was so unexpected that she almost dropped the vase again. She set it down carefully on the marble table, her heart hammering against her ribs. Thank you." She turned to face him, trying to read his expression. "Is there anything else you need, Mr. Carter?" "Dominic." The correction came easily, as if he'd been thinking about it. "When it's just us, Mr. Carter makes me feel like I'm in a board meeting." Just us. The phrase hung in the air between them, loaded with implications she didn't dare explore. "I should probably stick to Mr. Carter," she said softly. "It's more professional." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne again, that same understated scent that had lingered in her memory. "And what if I don't want you to be professional right now?" The question sent heat spiraling through her chest. She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign that she was misreading this moment. But his eyes were intense, focused entirely on her with an attention that made her feel exposed and exhilarated at the same time. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Don't you?" His hand reached up, almost touching her cheek, before stopping just short. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about Monday night. About you." The admission hung between them like a bridge. She wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. Every rational part of her mind screamed warnings about power dynamics, about the impossibility of their different worlds, about the job she desperately needed. But there was something in his voice, something vulnerable beneath the confidence, that made her want to forget about logic entirely. "Mr. Carter?" "Dominic. Dominic." His name felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. "This isn't... we can't..." "Can't what?" He moved closer still, and this time his fingers did brush her cheek, feather-light and warm. "Talk, get to know each other, find out if what I felt the other night was real." She should pull away. She should remind him about boundaries, about the fact that she was his employee, about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for just a moment. "I felt it too," she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. When she opened her eyes, his face was closer than before. She could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes, could count the faint lines that spoke of laughter and sun, and a life she could barely imagine. "Have dinner with me," he said. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because..." She struggled to find words that didn't sound ridiculous. "Because you're you and I'm me. Because fairy tales don't happen to girls from Little Haiti. Because I'm terrified of what I'm feeling. Because you work here," he guessed, his thumb tracing along her jawline. "Because people will talk. Because you think we're too different." Each reason hit like an arrow finding its target. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "What if none of that mattered?" he asked. "What if it was just you and me finding out what this is?" Before she could answer, the sound of heels clicking on marble echoed through the foyer. They sprang apart, just as Mrs. Chen appeared around the corner, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Carter," she said smoothly, "your conference call with Tokyo is in 5 minutes." "Right. Thank you, Mrs. Chen." His voice was perfectly composed, but Amara could see the reluctance in his eyes as he stepped back. "Amara, thank you for taking care of the orchids." "Of course, Mr. Carter." As he walked away, she caught the slight emphasis he placed on his formal title, a reminder of her retreat into professional distance. Mrs. Chen waited until his footsteps disappeared down the hall before speaking. "The flowers look lovely," the older woman said, her tone carefully neutral. "Very well cared for." Amara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had the distinct feeling that Mrs. Chen had seen more than she was letting on, and the weight of that realization settled in her stomach like a stone. "I should get back to work," Amara said. "Yes," Mrs. Chen agreed. "I think that would be wise." But as Amara spent the rest of the morning cleaning and organizing, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The invisible barriers that had defined her place in this house felt thinner now, more fragile. And when she found a single purple orchid on her cleaning cart later that afternoon, fresh, perfect, and definitely not there before, she knew that Dominic Carter wasn't going to let her retreat into the background as easily as she'd hoped. The orchid seemed to whisper promises of impossible things, and despite every rational thought in her head, Amara found herself listening. The purple orchid sat on Amara's nightstand like a beautiful secret. For 3 days she'd stared at it every morning while getting dressed for work, and every night before falling asleep. Its petals remained perfect, as if time had stopped the moment Dominic placed it on her cart. Kira had asked about it twice, but Amara had deflected with vague mentions of leftover flowers from an event. She couldn't explain why she'd brought it home, couldn't explain why she'd bought a small glass vase with money she didn't have to spare, couldn't explain the way her heart raced every time she looked at it. What she really couldn't explain was why she hadn't seen Dominic since. "You're distracted again," Mrs. Chen observed, as Amara polished the same section of banister for the 3rd time. "Perhaps you need some air. Why don't you take your lunch break in the garden?" Amara glanced at the older woman suspiciously. Mrs. Chen never suggested breaks, especially not in areas where she might encounter the owner of the house. But something in her expression, almost maternal despite her usual stern demeanor, made Amara nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. That sounds nice." The garden was a masterpiece of landscape architecture, with winding paths that led through carefully curated sections of tropical plants. Amara found a stone bench tucked beneath a flowering jacaranda tree, its purple blooms creating a canopy overhead. She unwrapped the peanut butter sandwich she'd packed, trying to enjoy the rare moment of peace. "I was hoping you'd be here." She turned to find Dominic approaching down the garden path, dressed in a navy suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for his frame. He carried 2 coffee cups and wore an expression that was somehow both confident and uncertain. "Mr. Carter." She started to stand, but he gestured for her to stay seated. "Dominic, remember?" He offered her one of the cups. "Cuban coffee from that little place on Calle Ocho. I thought you might like it." The gesture was so thoughtful, so unexpected, that she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." He sat beside her on the bench, careful to maintain a respectable distance. "I also wanted to apologize for the other day. I may have been too forward." Amara sipped the coffee, rich and sweet with just a hint of cinnamon. It was perfect. Better than the instant coffee she made at home. Better than anything she usually allowed herself to enjoy. "You don't need to apologize." "Don't I?" He studied her profile as she stared down at her hands. "You've been avoiding me. I've been working. In the East Wing, the basement storage rooms, the guest quarters that haven't been used in months." His voice held a hint of amusement. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you've been very thorough in your cleaning of spaces I never even visit." Heat flooded her cheeks. Of course he'd noticed. Of course Mrs. Chen had told him. "I just thought it was better to maintain professional boundaries." "And what if I don't want professional boundaries?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Amara finally looked at him, taking in the intensity of his gaze, the way he leaned slightly toward her as if drawn by some invisible force. "It doesn't matter what either of us wants," she said quietly. "This isn't how the world works." "Whose world?" "The one where people decide who you can care about based on your bank account. The one where feelings are supposed to follow some predetermined script about who belongs with whom." His passion surprised her. She'd expected him to be more calculating, more aware of social expectations. Instead, he sounded almost angry at the very idea of letting convention dictate his choices. "The real world, Dominic," using his first name, felt like a small rebellion. "The one where I need this job, where people like me don't get happy endings with people like you." "People like me?" There was something sharp in his voice now. "What kind of person do you think I am?" She gestured around them, at the manicured garden, the mansion visible through the trees, the obvious wealth that surrounded them like armor. "Someone who's never had to worry about rent, someone who's never had to choose between buying groceries and paying the electric bill. Someone who lives in a world where problems get solved with money instead of hard work and hope." The words came out harsher than she'd intended, colored by years of watching wealthy people move through life with a carelessness she could never afford. She expected him to get defensive, to prove her point by walking away. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee cup with an expression she couldn't read. "You're right," he said finally. "I've never worried about rent. I've never had to choose between necessities because I couldn't afford both. I inherited a life that most people can only dream about." The admission surprised her. She'd expected denial, justification, or at least some attempt to minimize the gulf between their experiences. "But," he continued, meeting her eyes again, "that doesn't mean I don't understand what it feels like to be trapped by other people's expectations, to have every choice you make scrutinized and judged, to wonder if anyone will ever see you as more than what you represent." There was something raw in his voice, something that spoke of loneliness despite being surrounded by luxury. Amara found herself studying his face, seeing past the confidence and control to something more vulnerable underneath. "People see a name, a net worth, a social position," he said. "They want things from me, access, money, connections. But you—" He paused, as if searching for the right words. "I looked at me like I was just a person, even before the wine, even before we talked, like I was worth seeing." The confession broke something open in her chest. She'd spent so much time thinking about the distance between their worlds that she'd never considered how isolating his world might be. "I see you," she said softly. "I know. That's why I can't just let this go." He shifted closer on the bench, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "Have dinner with me. Not here, not as employer and employee, just as two people who want to know each other better. Dominic, one dinner. If you hate it, if it's awful, if you never want to see me again outside of work, I'll respect that. But don't say no because you think we're too different. Say no because you don't feel what I feel." The challenge in his words made her heart race, because the truth was, she did feel it. This pull toward him that grew stronger every time they were in the same room. She felt it in the way her skin tingled when he looked at her, in the way his voice stayed with her long after their conversations ended, in the way she'd kept that purple orchid like a talisman. "One dinner," she heard herself say. His smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. "One dinner, but not somewhere fancy, somewhere normal, somewhere I won't feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." "Deal." He stood, extending his hand to help her up. When their fingers touched, that same electric current shot through her, and she saw recognition of it flash in his eyes. "Saturday? 7 o'clock? Okay." The word felt like jumping off a cliff. As they walked back toward the house together, Amara caught Mrs. Chen watching from an upstairs window. The older woman's expression was unreadable, but something in her posture suggested she'd been expecting this development, maybe even hoping for it. "Thank you for the coffee," Amara said as they reached the back entrance. "Thank you for saying yes." Dominic's hand brushed hers briefly, a touch so light it might have been accidental, if not for the way his eyes lingered on her face. "I'll pick you up at 7. As she watched him disappear into the house, Amara realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Whatever happened next, whatever complications arose from this decision, there was no going back to the safety of invisibility. For the first time in her life, she was about to step into the light, and she was terrified it might blind them both. Saturday arrived, with the weight of anticipation and the sting of panic. Amara stood in front of her tiny closet, staring at the modest collection of clothes hanging before her. Everything looked wrong, too casual, too worn, too obviously purchased from discount stores, with careful attention to price tags rather than style. "Girl, you're spiraling," Kira observed from the bed, where she was painting her nails a vibrant coral color. "It's just dinner, not the Met Gala." "Easy for you to say." Amara pulled out a navy blue dress she'd bought for job interviews. Simple, conservative, forgettable. "You don't have to worry about looking like you belong in someone else's world. Maybe that's the point." Kira blew on her nails, studying her sister with the brutal honesty that only family could provide. "Maybe he doesn't want you to look like you belong in his world. Maybe he wants you to look like you." The words hit deeper than expected. Amara sank onto the edge of the bed, the dress crumpled in her hands. "What am I doing, Kira? This is crazy." "Yeah, it is." Her sister's voice was surprisingly gentle. "But maybe crazy isn't always bad. Maybe sometimes it's brave." Amara looked at Kira, really looked at her. When had her baby sister become so wise? When had she stopped being the irresponsible teenager and started offering advice that actually made sense? "He could have anyone," Amara said quietly. "Models, actresses, socialites, women who grew up knowing how to navigate his world. But he asked you." Kira set down her nail polish and moved closer. He's seen all those other women, Amara. He sees them every day at those fancy parties you serve at. And he still asked you. The simple truth of it settled something anxious in Amara's chest. She held up the navy dress again, seeing it with new eyes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It was her. "Okay," she said, more to herself than to Kira. "Okay." At exactly 7 o'clock, Amara stood on the sidewalk outside their apartment building, smoothing her hands over the dress one final time. She'd kept her makeup simple, her hair in a low ponytail, her jewelry limited to the small gold cross necklace her grandmother had given her. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, not the flashy sports car she'd half expected, but something understated and elegant. Dominic emerged from the driver's side, and Amara's breath caught in her throat. He was dressed in dark jeans and a white button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. No tie, no suit jacket, just clean lines and effortless style that probably cost more than her monthly salary, but looked completely relaxed. "You look beautiful," he said as he approached, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe it might actually be true. "Thank you." She glanced at his car, then back at him. "I was expecting a driver. I thought you might prefer it to be just us." He opened the passenger door for her, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and natural. "I hope you're hungry." As they pulled away from her neighborhood, Amara watched the familiar streets pass by through the window. Corner stores, bus stops, small houses with chain-link fences, and gardens that grew more from determination than design. She wondered what Dominic saw when he looked at it, if he understood that these blocks represented home, community, and a kind of resilience that couldn't be bought. "Tell me about where we're going," she said, partly from curiosity and partly to fill the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "A place in Coconut Grove. Nothing fancy, just good food and music." He glanced at her as they stopped at a red light. "The owner's named Gabriel. He's been cooking there for 30 years and he makes the best ropa vieja outside of Havana." The restaurant was exactly what he'd promised. Warm, unpretentious, filled with the sound of Spanish conversations and the rich aroma of garlic and cumin. String lights hung from the ceiling and local artwork covered the walls. It was the kind of place that felt like a family kitchen that had grown too big for its original boundaries. Gabriel himself seated them, embracing Dominic like an old friend and greeting Amara with the kind of genuine warmth that made her feel instantly welcome. Their table was tucked into a corner, intimate without being secluded, with a view of the small stage where a guitarist was setting up for the evening's performance. "You come here often," Amara observed, watching the easy familiarity between Dominic and the staff. "Since college. My roommate brought me here during freshman year and I've been hooked ever since." He poured water from the pitcher Gabriel had left on their table. "It's one of the few places where I can just be myself." "And who is that?" "Yourself, I mean." The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Someone simpler than you might expect. Someone who actually prefers places like this to the exclusive restaurants where I usually end up for business dinners. But you were born into that world. The exclusive restaurants, the social expectations, all of it. Born into it, yes, but that doesn't mean I chose it." He met her eyes across the table. "My father died when I was 12. Heart attack. One day he was teaching me to sail and the next day I was inheriting responsibilities I didn't understand and money I'd never asked for." The revelation shifted something in her perception of him. She'd imagined a childhood of privilege and ease, not loss and premature responsibility. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It was a long time ago, but it taught me early that money doesn't solve everything. Sometimes it just makes things more complicated." He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "What about you? Have you always lived in Miami?" "Born and raised. My parents died in a car accident when I was 21 and Kira was 14. That's when I learned that sometimes responsibility finds you whether you're ready or not." The parallel between their experiences hung in the air. Two people who'd been forced to grow up too fast, albeit under very different circumstances. "That's when you became her guardian." Officially and unofficially. She was about to age out of the system anyway, but I couldn't let that happen. She's all the family I have left. Amara smiled, thinking of her sister's earlier advice. "She's actually the one who told me I should say yes to this dinner." Smart girl. I like her already. The food arrived. Generous portions of tender beef, black beans and rice that tasted like it had been simmered with love and patience. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing as naturally as the wine Dominic had ordered. He told her about the pressure of running a company he'd inherited, about board meetings filled with people twice his age who questioned every decision. She told him about her dreams of going back to school someday, maybe becoming a nurse, about the way she'd had to put everything on hold to take care of Kira. "Why nursing?" he asked. "Because I like taking care of people, and because—" She paused, surprised by her own honesty. "Because I want to do something that matters, something that makes a real difference in people's lives." "You already do that, cleaning houses, taking care of your sister, working multiple jobs to support her dreams, keeping a family together when it would have been easier to give up." His voice was serious, intent. "That matters more than you know." The sincerity in his words made her chest tight with emotion. When was the last time someone had seen her sacrifices as strength rather than just necessity? The guitarist began to play, soft, melodic Spanish ballads that provided the perfect soundtrack to their conversation. Other couples filled the small dance floor, moving slowly to the romantic rhythms. "Dance with me," Dominic said suddenly. "I don't really know how to dance to this kind of music." "Neither do I, properly. We'll figure it out together." He stood and extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. On the small dance floor, surrounded by other couples lost in their own worlds, Dominic pulled her close. One hand found the small of her back, the other cradled her hand against his chest. They moved slowly, barely dancing, just swaying to the music. Amara could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm, could smell the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with the warm evening air. "This feels like a dream," she whispered. "Good dream or bad dream?" She looked up at him, at the way the string lights cast shadows across his face, at the intensity in his eyes that made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. "Too good to be real." "It's real," he said, his voice low and certain. "This moment, right here, it's real." As the song ended, they remained close, neither wanting to break the spell. When Dominic's thumb traced across her knuckles, when his eyes dropped to her lips for just a moment before meeting her gaze again, Amara felt herself standing at the edge of something that would change everything. "Take me home," she said quietly. And as they drove back through the Miami night, her hand resting lightly on his arm, Amara realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The kiss happened on her doorstep. They'd sat in his car for 20 minutes after arriving at her apartment, neither wanting the evening to end. The conversation had grown softer, more intimate, filled with the kind of silences that spoke louder than words. When Dominic finally walked her to the door, when he turned to say goodnight, the space between them seemed to shrink until it disappeared entirely. His lips were warm, gentle, asking a question her body answered without hesitation. The kiss was everything their first evening together had promised, tender but passionate, careful but certain. When they finally broke apart, Amara's heart was racing so fast she was sure he could hear it. "I should go," he whispered, but his forehead rested against hers, his hands still framing her face. "You should," she agreed, making no move to step away. "Amara, I know." She closed her eyes, trying to memorize the feeling of this moment. "I know this is complicated. We don't have to rush anything. We can take this as slow as you want." The consideration in his voice, the way he put her comfort before his own desire, made her chest tight with emotion. "Thank you." He kissed her forehead softly before stepping back. "I'll see you Monday." "Monday," she confirmed, watching him walk back to his car. As his taillights disappeared around the corner, she touched her lips, still able to feel the warmth of his kiss. She was in trouble, the kind of trouble that felt like flying. Monday morning arrived with a text message that made her smile despite her pre-work exhaustion. "Good morning, beautiful. Hope you slept well. D." She stared at the message for a full minute before responding. "Good morning, thank you for Saturday, it was perfect." His reply came immediately. "First of many, I hope." The warmth that spread through her chest carried her through the morning commute, through the familiar routine of entering the mansion, through Mrs. Chen's Monday morning briefing about the week's schedule. But as the day progressed, she began to notice things that made her stomach twist with anxiety. The way Mrs. Chen's assistant Patricia stopped talking when Amara entered the kitchen, the pointed looks between the other staff members, the sudden silence that fell when she walked into a room. "Is everything okay?" she asked Mrs. Chen during her lunch break, unable to ignore the tension any longer. The older woman looked up from her clipboard, her expression carefully neutral. "Should something be wrong?" "I don't know, it just feels like—" Amara struggled to find the words. "Like people are looking at me differently." Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying Amara's face with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. "You were seen," she said finally. "Seen?" Saturday night, at Gabriel's restaurant in Coconut Grove, with Mr. Carter. The bottom dropped out of Amara's world. She gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, her mind racing through the implications. Who saw us? Patricia's cousin works there as a waitress. She recognized you both. Mrs. Chen's voice remained neutral, but her eyes held a warning. She mentioned it to Patricia, who mentioned it to others. Oh God. Amara sank onto one of the kitchen stools, her legs suddenly unsteady. Mrs. Chen, I can explain. You don't owe me an explanation. The interruption was gentle but firm. Your personal life is your business. But, she paused, choosing her words carefully. This household employs 15 people. Most of them have families, mortgages, responsibilities. Gossip has a way of spreading beyond these walls. The implication hit Amara like a physical blow. Her relationship with Dominic, if it could even be called that after one dinner, could affect not just her job, but everyone who worked here. The thought made her nauseous. What do I do? That depends. Mrs. Chen sat across from her, her expression softening slightly. How serious is this? Is it a passing attraction or something deeper? Amara thought about Saturday night, about the way Dominic had looked at her during dinner, about the kiss that still made her pulse quicken. I don't know yet, but it could be deeper. Then you need to be very careful. There are people who would use this against both of you, and against everyone who works here. Mrs. Chen leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Mr. Carter's business has enemies, competitors who would love to see him make a mistake that could be exploited. A scandal involving an employee could be exactly what they're looking for. The weight of responsibility settled on Amara's shoulders like a lead blanket. She'd been thinking about her own heart, her own future, but she hadn't considered the collateral damage her choices might cause. Mrs. Chen, she said quietly, what would you do if you were me? The older woman was quiet for a long time, her fingers drumming thoughtfully against the table. I would ask myself if what I was feeling was worth the risk to everyone involved, and then I would be honest about the answer. That afternoon, Amara found herself assigned to clean Dominic's home office, a task she was certain Mrs. Chen had orchestrated. The room was empty when she entered, filled with afternoon sunlight and the quiet hum of expensive electronics. She was dusting his desk when she noticed the framed photograph scattered across its surface. Dominic, with what appeared to be his father, both of them on a sailboat with matching smiles. A formal portrait of a woman who had his eyes, probably his mother. Several pictures of him with various groups of people at charity events and business functions. In every photo, he looked successful, confident, perfectly at ease in his world of wealth and privilege. Looking at them now, after their intimate dinner and that perfect kiss, felt like a reminder of the gulf between their lives. Find anything interesting? She spun around to find him standing in the doorway, jacket slung over his shoulder, tie loosened around his neck. He looked tired but smiled when he saw her, the kind of smile that transformed his entire face. I'm sorry, I was just looking at my pictures. It's fine. He crossed to the desk, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne. What do you think? You look happy in them. Do I? He picked up the photo with his father, studying it with an expression she couldn't read. I suppose I was. Things were simpler then. Before you inherited everything? Before I understood what I was inheriting. He set the photo down and turned to face her fully. How was your day? You seem tense. The concern in his voice almost broke her resolve. She wanted to tell him everything, about the gossip, about Mrs. Chen's warnings, about the fear that was growing in her chest like a living thing. Instead, she forced a smile. Just tired. Long weekend. He studied her face, and she could see him cataloguing the signs of stress she was trying to hide. Amara, if something's wrong, nothing's wrong. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. I should let you get back to work. She started toward the door, but his hand caught her wrist gently. Hey, talk to me, what's going on? The touch sent electricity up her arm, the same spark she'd felt since the first night they'd touched. But now, instead of excitement, it brought panic. Every moment they stood this close, every word they exchanged, every look that lingered too long was another risk she was taking with other people's livelihoods. We need to be more careful, she said quietly. Careful about what? This. Us. Whatever this is. She pulled her hand free, immediately missing the warmth of his touch. People are starting to talk. Something shifted in his expression, a hardening around his eyes that reminded her suddenly of his reputation in the business world. Let them talk. You don't understand, it's not just about us. There are other people who could get hurt. Who's been talking? The question was sharp, edged with an authority she'd never heard him use before. Mrs. Chen, Patricia, it doesn't matter who. What matters is that this could affect everyone who works here. Your competitors, your business relationships. Mrs. Chen says there are people who would use this against you. Mrs. Chen is being overly cautious. Is she? Amara moved to the window, putting distance between them. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she's being realistic about what happens when people from different worlds try to pretend those differences don't matter. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. When she finally turned back to him, Dominic was watching her with an expression that mixed frustration and hurt in equal measure. So that's it? He asked quietly. One dinner, one perfect evening, and you're ready to walk away because people might talk. I'm trying to be practical. No, you're trying to be safe. There's a difference. The accusations stung because it was true, but safety wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Kira's future, about the jobs of people who'd done nothing wrong except work in the same house where she'd fallen for their employer. Maybe safe is what we both need right now, she said. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. If that's what you want, it's not about what I want, isn't it? He moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Because what I want is to take you to dinner again. What I want is to learn everything about you, your favorite books, what makes you laugh, how you take your coffee in the morning. What I want is to stop pretending that what happened between us was just a moment of curiosity. His words hit her like physical blows, each one landing exactly where her heart was most vulnerable. She could see the truth in his eyes, could feel the pull between them that seemed to grow stronger every time they were in the same room. I want that too, she whispered. But wanting something doesn't make it possible. It makes it worth fighting for. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. They stepped apart quickly, but not before Amara caught a glimpse of Patricia passing by the open doorway, her expression knowing and disapproving. I should go, Amara said, her voice barely audible. This time Dominic didn't try to stop her, but as she walked past him toward the door, she heard him say quietly, This isn't over, Amara. Whatever you're afraid of, whatever they've told you to be afraid of, it doesn't change what's happening between us. She didn't turn around, didn't trust herself to speak, but as she left his office and returned to the safety of her assigned tasks, she carried his words with her like a promise and a threat rolled into one, because he was right. It wasn't over, and that terrified her more than anything else. The distance between them became a living thing. For 2 weeks, Amara and Dominic moved through the mansion like dancers, in a carefully choreographed routine, designed to keep them apart. She cleaned the east wing while he worked in the west. She took her breaks when he was in meetings. She left through the service entrance when his car was in the driveway, but the space between them hummed with unfinished conversations and unspoken truths. You're losing weight, Kira observed over their shared breakfast of toast and instant coffee. And you look like you haven't slept in days. I'm fine. No, you're not. Her sister set down her cup with the kind of deliberate motion that meant a serious conversation was coming. You're miserable, and don't try to deny it. I've been watching you mope around here like someone stole your favorite thing. Amara pushed the eggs around on her plate, unable to meet Kira's knowing gaze. It's complicated. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting it looks pretty simple. You like him, he likes you, and you're both too scared to do anything about it. There are consequences, Kira. Real ones. People could lose their jobs, including me, and if I lose this job, we'll figure it out. We always do. Kira reached across the small table and covered Amara's hand with her own. But what if you're giving up something real for problems that might never happen? And what if I'm not? What if I'm protecting us from something that could destroy everything we've worked for? Kira was quiet for a moment, studying her sister's face with an expression far too mature for her 19 years. When did you become so afraid of taking risks? The question hit harder than expected. When had she become the kind of person who chose safety over possibility? When had fear become her default response to anything that felt too good to be true? When I became responsible for you, Amara said quietly, I never asked you to give up your life for mine. You didn't have to ask. You're my sister, and you're mine. Kira squeezed her hand. Which means I want you to be happy. And you haven't been happy in a long time, Amara. Not until recently. At work, the careful distance was becoming harder to maintain. Dominic had stopped trying to accidentally run into her, but she could feel his presence in the house like a magnetic pull she had to actively resist. Sometimes she would enter a room, and know he'd been there recently. His cologne lingering in the air, papers on his desk shifted in a way that suggested restless energy. Mrs. Chen had stopped assigning her to areas where they might encounter each other, a kindness that felt both protective and suffocating. The other staff members had settled back into their normal routines, but Amara could still feel the occasional speculative glance, the conversations that quieted when she entered a room. "Mr. Carter wants to see you in his office," Patricia announced on Thursday afternoon, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes bright with curiosity. Amara's heart stuttered. They'd successfully avoided each other for 14 days, and now he was summoning her to the one place in the house that felt most dangerous. Did he say what about? No, just that you should come when you have a moment. Every step toward his office felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. She knocked softly on the doorframe, waiting for permission to enter, even though the door was open. "Come in. Close the door behind you." His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear something underneath it, frustration maybe, or exhaustion that matched her own. When she turned to face him, she was struck by how tired he looked, the same shadows under his eyes that she saw in her own mirror every morning. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Carter." The formal address made him flinch visibly. "Sit down, please." She remained standing, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that felt both professional and defensive. "Is there something wrong with my work?" "You know there isn't." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "This is about something else, entirely. I don't think we should—" "I'm leaving." The words hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the back of the chair she'd refused to sit in, her knees suddenly unsteady. "Leaving? For 3 weeks. Business in London, then Tokyo. Some deals that require personal attention." His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes never left her face. "I wanted you to know, in case you were wondering why the house feels different. That's good. For business, I mean. International expansion and all that." "Is it?" He stood slowly, moving around the desk to lean against its edge. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like running away." "Mr. Carter, Dominic." The correction was sharp, almost angry. "My name is Dominic, and you know it. Stop hiding behind formality." "I'm not hiding, I'm being appropriate." "Appropriate." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right. Because what we felt at Gabriel's was so appropriate. The way you responded when I kissed you was the height of propriety." Heat flooded her cheeks. "That was a mistake." "Was it?" He pushed off from the desk, moving closer, "because it felt like the most honest thing either of us had done in years." "Dominic, please." His name slipped out before she could stop it, and she saw the flash of satisfaction in his eyes. "This isn't fair. None of this is fair. What's not fair is pretending that what happened between us was meaningless. What's not fair is letting other people's fear dictate how we feel about each other. It's not other people's fear, it's reality. We live in different worlds." "Stop." The word came out harder than he'd probably intended. "Stop hiding behind that excuse. Yes, we have different backgrounds. Yes, there are complications. But the reason you're pushing me away isn't because of society or class differences or whatever other barriers you want to throw up." "Then why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Because you're terrified of wanting something this much. Because you've spent so long taking care of everyone else that you've forgotten how to let someone take care of you." His words stripped away every defense she'd carefully constructed, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne. "Tell me I'm wrong, Amara. Tell me you don't feel what I feel. Tell me that when you go home at night, you don't think about what could happen between us, if you were brave enough to find out." She opened her mouth to deny it, to lie with the same careful precision she'd been using for 2 weeks, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right about all of it, the fear, the want, the endless nights spent imagining what if. "It doesn't matter what I feel," she whispered. "It's the only thing that matters." The space between them had shrunk to nothing, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the way his pulse jumped in his throat. When he lifted his hand toward her face, she didn't pull away. "Come with me," he said quietly. "What?" "To London. To Tokyo. Come with me." The invitation hung between them like a bridge to another life. For a moment, she let herself imagine it, waking up in hotel rooms with views of foreign cities, sharing meals in places she'd only seen in magazines, exploring the world with someone who saw her as more than just the sum of her responsibilities. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because—" She struggled to find words that didn't sound like excuses. "Because I have a job, a life, Kira. Bring Kira, or don't. She's 19, Amara. Old enough to take care of herself for a few weeks. You don't understand. I can't just drop everything and follow you around the world like some kind of... Like what? Like someone who deserves to have adventures? Like someone worth investing in? The questions hit every insecurity she'd ever carried about her place in the world. Like someone who's forgetting her place. The silence that followed was deafening. When Dominic spoke again, his voice was quiet but edged with something that might have been anger. And what place is that exactly? The one where you work for me? The one where you're not allowed to want anything beyond what's been predetermined for someone of your background? The one where I'm realistic about what's possible? What's possible? He repeated, stepping back. Right. Well, let me tell you what I think is possible. I think it's possible that we could be happy together. I think it's possible that the differences between us matter less than what we have in common. I think it's possible that you're using every excuse you can think of because you're too afraid to find out what could happen if you stopped fighting this. His words hung in the air between them. A challenge and an accusation rolled into one. Amara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. Maybe I am afraid, she said. Maybe I'm terrified of wanting something I can't have. Maybe I'm scared of what happens when this ends, and I'm left with nothing but the memory of what it felt like to pretend I belonged in your world. What if it doesn't end? Everything ends, Dominic, especially things like this. He stared at her for a long moment, and she watched something shift in his expression, a closing off, a retreat behind the professional mask she'd seen him wear in business meetings. You're right, he said finally. Everything does end. I guess I just thought we might get to choose when. The dismissal in his voice was gentle but final. Amara felt something break apart in her chest, but she forced herself to nod. Have a safe trip, Mr. Carter. This time he didn't correct her use of his formal title, and as she walked out of his office, closing the door behind her with the careful precision of someone trying not to shatter, she wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or the smartest decision she'd ever made. Either way, it felt like dying. The mansion felt like a museum without him. For the first week after Dominic left for London, Amara told herself the hollowness in her chest was relief. No more careful choreography to avoid encounters. No more electric tension crackling through rooms when they were in the same space. No more fighting the pull towards something that could only end in heartbreak. But relief was supposed to feel lighter than this. He calls every other day to check on the house, Mrs. Chen mentioned on Wednesday morning, her tone carefully neutral as she reviewed the week's schedule. Very particular about the temperature settings and the garden maintenance. Amara nodded, focusing intently on polishing a silver picture frame. That's good. Shows he cares about the property. Indeed. Mrs. Chen's voice carried something that might have been amusement. He also asked specifically about the orchids in the main salon, wanted to make sure they were being properly watered. The frame slipped in Amara's hands, and she had to catch it before it hit the marble surface. The purple orchids, the same variety as the one he'd left on her cart all those weeks ago. The same ones he'd noticed were wilting during their first real conversation. I'll make sure they're taken care of, she said quietly. I'm sure you will. That afternoon, while watering the orchids, Amara found herself wondering what London looked like through hotel windows, whether Dominic was sleeping well in an unfamiliar bed, whether he thought about their last conversation with the same regret that kept her awake at night. She shook her head, forcing the thoughts away. This was exactly what she'd wanted. Distance, clarity, a return to the simple routine of work without complications. So why did everything feel wrong? You're driving me crazy, Kira announced the following Saturday, sprawled across their small couch with her laptop balanced on her knees. It's like living with a ghost who occasionally remembers to eat. I'm fine. You're the opposite of fine. You're so not fine that it's actually impressive. Kira closed her laptop and turned to face her sister fully. When was the last time you smiled? And I mean really smiled, not that fake thing you do when you're trying to convince me you're okay. Amara couldn't remember. The realization was more depressing than she wanted to admit. I've been thinking, Kira continued, about what you said, about being responsible for me, about how you can't take risks because of what might happen to us. Kira, no, let me finish. Her sister's voice carried a seriousness that reminded Amara of their mother. I've been doing some research about college, about financial aid, about programs for students in my situation. And you know what I found out? Amara waited, sensing this conversation was heading somewhere she wasn't prepared for. I could get a full scholarship to Miami-Dade College, academic merit plus need-based aid. I could study graphic design, get my associate degree, then transfer to FIU for my bachelor's. Kira's eyes were bright, with the excitement Amara hadn't seen in months. I could be completely financially independent within 2 years. The information hit Amara like a punch to the chest. That's wonderful, Kira. I'm proud of you for researching all that. But, no buts. I think you should apply. Really? Kira studied her sister's face suspiciously. Because you look like I just told you I was moving to Mars. Amara forced a smile. I'm just surprised. You've never mentioned wanting to go to college before. I never thought it was possible before. I thought we were stuck, you know, like we'd both just keep working minimum wage jobs forever, trying to make ends meet. Kira moved closer on the couch. But watching you these past few weeks, seeing how miserable you are, it made me realize something. What's that? We're both living like we're afraid of wanting too much, like we don't deserve good things because of where we came from. Kira reached for Amara's hand. But maybe that's not true. Maybe we're allowed to want more. The words echoed something Dominic had said during their last conversation, about her being afraid of wanting something too much. The parallel made her chest tight with emotion. College is expensive even with scholarships. I'll figure it out. Work-study programs, part-time jobs, whatever it takes. Kira's voice was determined in a way that reminded Amara painfully of herself at that age. The point is, I don't want you to feel like you have to sacrifice your happiness for mine anymore. You're not a sacrifice, Kira. You're my sister. And you're mine, which means I want you to be happy. Kira squeezed her hand. Even if that means taking a risk on something that scares you. Monday brought news that made Amara's carefully constructed equilibrium crumble entirely. Mr. Carter's trip has been extended, Mrs. Chen announced during the morning staff meeting. He'll be in Tokyo for an additional 2 weeks, then returning directly to New York for board meetings. He won't be back in Miami until the end of next month. 6 more weeks. The number echoed in Amara's head as she went through the motions of her daily tasks. 6 more weeks of this hollow feeling, of rooms that felt too empty, of wondering what might have been if she'd been brave enough to say yes when he asked her to come with him. She was cleaning his office that afternoon, a task Mrs. Chen had resumed assigning her now that there was no risk of awkward encounters, when she noticed something different about his desk. The family photos were gone. The casual clutter of papers and coffee cups had been cleared away. Everything looked sterile, impersonal, as if no one had ever worked there at all. On impulse, she opened the top drawer of his desk, telling herself she was just checking for anything that needed cleaning. Instead, she found a small piece of paper with her name written on it in Dominic's handwriting. Her heart hammering, she unfolded it. Amara, I know you think this is for the best, and maybe you're right, but I need you to know that what I felt for you was real. What we could have had together was real. I hope someday you find the courage to believe you deserve all the good things life has to offer. D. She read the note 3 times before the tears started. Great, silent sobs that shook her entire body as she sat in his empty chair, surrounded by the ghost of his presence. The words blurred on the page, but she'd already memorized every letter. What we could have had together was real. Past tense, as if he'd already accepted that they were over before they'd ever truly begun. The worst part was that he was right. She had been afraid, not just of the complications or the gossip or the potential consequences, but of the intensity of what she'd felt for him, of how completely he'd managed to slip past every defense she'd spent years building. She'd been afraid of wanting him as much as she did, and now he was gone, and the wanting hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had grown sharper, more painful, like a constant ache she couldn't ignore. Miss Collins? Amara looked up to find Rodriguez standing in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. She quickly wiped her eyes and folded the note, slipping it into her pocket. I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez, I was just cleaning, I know. His voice was gentle, understanding in a way that made her want to cry all over again. But maybe what needs cleaning isn't in this room. Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, leaving her alone with her tears and the lingering scent of Dominic's cologne. That night, lying in bed with the note tucked safely in her jewelry box next to her grandmother's cross, Amara stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine 6 more weeks of this emptiness, 6 more weeks of going through the motions of living while feeling like half of herself was missing. Kira had been right about one thing. They were both living like they were afraid of wanting too much. But what if wanting more wasn't a betrayal of where they came from? What if it was the most honest thing they could do? As sleep finally claimed her, Amara found herself thinking about London hotels and Tokyo skylines, about what it might feel like to wake up somewhere new with someone who saw her as worth the risk. For the first time since Dominic had left, she let herself imagine what might have happened if she'd said yes, and for the first time in her life, she wondered if it wasn't too late to change her mind. The phone call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Amara jerked awake to the shrill sound of her cell phone vibrating against the nightstand. For a disoriented moment, she thought it might be Dominic, maybe calling from Tokyo where it would be evening, maybe having changed his mind about everything. Instead, Mrs. Chen's voice filled the darkness, urgent and uncharacteristically shaken. "Amara, I need you to come to the house. There's been a break-in." 20 minutes later, Amara stood in the mansion's main foyer surrounded by police officers, their radios crackling with static in the pristine silence. Emergency lights cast everything in harsh shadows, making the familiar space feel foreign and violated. "They knew the security code," Detective Morrison explained, his voice echoing off the marble floors. "Disabled the cameras, went straight for the office and the master bedroom. Professional job." Mrs. Chen looked smaller than usual, wrapped in a silk robe with her silver hair loose around her shoulders. They took his laptop, some business files, jewelry from the bedroom safe. But the strangest thing— "What's that?" Amara asked. "They left behind items worth far more. Art pieces, expensive electronics, cash that was sitting right there in plain sight." The older woman's eyes met Amara's. It's like they were looking for something specific. As the police finished their investigation and the house slowly returned to its usual quiet, Amara found herself standing in Dominic's office, surveying the damage. Drawers had been pulled out, papers scattered across the floor, the careful order of his private space destroyed. She knelt to gather the scattered photographs from his desk, the ones of him with his father, the formal portrait of his mother, the business photos that had seemed so intimidating weeks ago. Now they just looked vulnerable, like pieces of someone's life carelessly discarded. "Miss Collins." She looked up to find Detective Morrison in the doorway, his notebook still open in his hands. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you clean this office regularly. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Anyone asking questions about Mr. Carter's business, his schedule, his personal affairs?" The question sent a chill down her spine. "No, nothing like that. Why? This kind of targeted break-in, it usually means someone's been gathering information. Someone who knew when the house would be empty, what they were looking for, how to get in and out without being caught." His eyes were serious, professional, someone with inside knowledge. After he left, Amara sat in Dominic's chair, surrounded by the chaos of the break-in, and felt a fear she hadn't expected. Not for herself, but for him. Somewhere in Tokyo, he was going about his business, unaware that his private sanctuary had been violated, that someone was targeting him with enough precision to suggest real danger. She pulled out her phone before she could overthink it, scrolling to the contact she'd saved, but never used. Dominic, personal. Her finger hovered over the call button for a full minute before she finally pressed it. It rang 4 times before his voice filled the small space, thick with sleep and confusion. "Amara, what time is it? Are you okay?" The sound of her name in his voice, heavy with concern despite everything that had happened between them, made her chest tight with emotion. "I'm sorry to wake you. There's been a break-in at the house." Silence. Then, "Are you hurt? Is anyone hurt?" "No, everyone's fine." "But Dominic, they weren't random thieves. Detective Morrison thinks it was targeted. Someone who knew your schedule, your security codes, exactly what they were looking for." "Shit." She could hear him moving around, probably getting out of bed, probably already mentally cataloging what might have been compromised. "What did they take?" "Your laptop, some business files, jewelry from your bedroom, but they left behind things worth much more." "The detective thinks they were after specific information." Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on the hard edge she recognized from his business persona. "I'm coming home." "Dominic, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. This is serious, Amara. If someone's targeting me specifically, if they have inside information—" He paused. "You could be in danger too." "Me? Why would I be in danger?" "Because you work in my house. Because you have access to information about my schedule, my habits, my security measures." His voice softened slightly. "Because if someone wanted to get to me, you'd be a logical target." The possibility hadn't occurred to her, but now it settled in her stomach like ice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need you to be careful. I'm saying I should never have left without making sure you were protected." He sighed, and she could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was frustrated. "I'm saying I'm getting on a plane tonight. The police are handling it. You don't need to come back because of this." don't I?" There was something in his voice now, something that sounded almost vulnerable. "Amara, when Mrs. Chen called me an hour ago when she told me what happened, the first thing I thought about wasn't my business files, or my laptop, or any of the things they stole. What was it? It was you. Whether you were safe, whether someone had hurt you, whether I'd made a terrible mistake leaving you there unprotected." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I spent 6 weeks telling myself that walking away was the right thing to do. That respecting your choice to keep your distance was noble, mature, all the things a good man should do. Dominic, but when I thought someone might have hurt you, when I imagined something happening to you while I was half a world away," he paused. "It made me realize that walking away wasn't noble. It was cowardly." The admission hung between them across thousands of miles, carried by satellites and fiber-optic cables, but feeling as intimate as if he were standing right beside her. "You weren't being cowardly. You were respecting my decision. Was I? Or was I taking the easy way out because fighting for you would have required more courage than I had?" The question hit her like a physical blow, partly because it echoed her own doubts about her choices, and partly because it suggested he'd been questioning his own decisions as much as she'd been questioning hers. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I've had 6 weeks to think about it. 6 weeks of hotel rooms and business meetings and wondering what the hell I was doing, pretending I could just forget about you." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "I was wrong, Amara. About walking away, about accepting your decision without fighting for what we could have. I was wrong, and I'm coming home to tell you that in person. The break-in is an excuse, a good one, a legitimate one, but an excuse nonetheless." She could hear him moving around again, probably packing. "I was already thinking about coming back early, about showing up at your door and asking you to give us another chance. The break-in just gave me a reason that wouldn't sound completely pathetic. Despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the exhaustion, Amara found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. It would have sounded pathetic, completely, devastatingly pathetic. The kind of pathetic that romance novels are made of. I happen to like romance novels. Do you?" There was warmth in his voice now, something that sounded almost like hope. "Good to know." They were quiet for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid settling between them. Finally, Dominic spoke again. "I'll be home tomorrow night. We need to talk about the security situation, figure out who might be targeting me and why. But after that," he paused, "after that, I'd like to talk about us, if you're willing." Amara looked around his violated office, at the scattered papers and overturned drawers, at the evidence of how quickly safety could be shattered. Life was fragile, unpredictable, full of risks that couldn't be avoided no matter how carefully you planned. Maybe the biggest risk was refusing to take any risks at all. "I'm willing," she said. "Good." She could hear the smile in his voice. "Amara?" "Yeah? Thank you for calling me. For being the first person to think about my safety instead of just the business implications." "Of course." "And Amara?" "Yeah? I missed you. Every single day I missed you." After they hung up, Amara sat in the quiet office for a long time, surrounded by the debris of the break-in and the ghost of his presence. But for the first time in weeks, the emptiness felt different. Tomorrow, everything would change again. And for the first time since he'd left, she wasn't afraid of what that might mean. He arrived at sunset, just as the Miami sky was painting itself in shades of gold and crimson. Amara watched from the main salon window as his car pulled through the gates, her heart hammering against her ribs with a mixture of anticipation and terror. 6 weeks. It had been 6 weeks since their last conversation in his office, since she'd walked away from the possibility of everything she'd never known she wanted. Now he was back, and she had no idea what that meant for either of them. "Mrs. Chen appeared beside her at the window, her expression unreadable. "He looks tired." She was right. Even from a distance, Amara could see the exhaustion in the way Dominic moved as he got out of the car. Slower than usual, like someone carrying invisible weight. He'd flown halfway around the world, probably hadn't slept properly in days, and yet he'd come straight here instead of going home to rest. "The police want to brief him about the investigation," Mrs. Chen continued. "Detective Morrison will be here within the hour." Amara nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd spent the day alternating between cleaning compulsively and standing frozen in whatever room she happened to be in, paralyzed by the knowledge that everything was about to change again. "Amara," Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle, almost maternal. "Whatever happens between you two, whatever you decide, you should know that I've never seen him as human as he's been since he met you." Before Amara could respond to that cryptic statement, the front door opened. She heard his voice in the foyer, speaking to Rodriguez about the security upgrades that had been installed that morning. The familiar sound of it sent warmth spiraling through her chest, even as her nerves threatened to overwhelm her completely. "I should go," she whispered to Mrs. Chen. "Let him get settled. Or," the older woman said with a knowing smile, "you could stay and let him know you're here." But Amara was already moving toward the back of the house, toward the safety of the kitchen and the familiar routine of preparing dinner. If she kept her hands busy, maybe her mind wouldn't spiral into all the ways this reunion could go wrong. She made it exactly 10 minutes before he found her. "Running away already?" His voice came from the kitchen doorway, warm and slightly amused. When she turned to face him, her breath caught in her throat. Mrs. Chen had been right. He looked exhausted. But underneath the fatigue, his eyes held an intensity that made her feel like he was seeing straight through to her soul. "I wanted to give you space to get settled," she said, wiping her hands on her apron in a gesture that felt nervous and unnecessary. "The last thing I want is space." He stepped into the kitchen and suddenly, the large room felt impossibly small, especially from you. They stood there for a moment, drinking each other in. He was wearing a dark sweater and jeans, casual clothes that made him look younger, more approachable but no less commanding. His hair was slightly mussed from travel, and there was stubble along his jaw that suggested he'd been too focused on getting home to worry about his usual grooming routine. "How was your flight?" The question was absurd under the circumstances, but she needed something to fill the charged silence between them. Long, lonely, full of regrets and second-guessing. His honesty was disarming, as always. "How have you been?" "Miserable," she admitted before she could stop herself. The word hung between them like a confession. Dominic's expression softened, and he took another step closer. "Good," he said quietly. "Good. Good that you were miserable. Good that I wasn't the only one questioning every decision I made." He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with airport air and exhaustion. "Good that what happened between us mattered enough to make you unhappy when it was gone." "It mattered," she whispered. "It all mattered." Past tense? The question was gentle, but she could hear the vulnerability underneath it. He was giving her an opportunity to clarify, to explain whether her feelings had changed during their separation or simply evolved. "Present tense," she said, her voice stronger now. "It matters. You matter." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, hope, something that looked dangerously close to joy. "Amara, I was wrong." The words tumbled out of her in a rush, all the thoughts she'd been carrying for weeks, finally finding their voice. About walking away, about being practical, about all of it. "I was scared, and I let that fear make decisions for me that I should have made with my heart." "You weren't wrong to be scared. What I was asking of you, what this could mean for both of us, it's terrifying. But that's not a good enough reason to say no, is it? Being terrified of something doesn't automatically make it wrong." "No," he agreed, reaching up to cup her cheek with his hand. "Sometimes it just makes it important." The touch sent electricity through her entire body, the same spark she'd felt from the very first night he'd steadied her hand after the wine incident. But this time, instead of pulling away, she leaned into it. "I missed you so much," she breathed. "Every day, every night, I kept expecting the feeling to fade, kept telling myself it would get easier, but it just got worse." "I know. I felt the same way." His thumb traced along her cheekbone, and she could see her own longing reflected in his eyes. "I tried to convince myself that respecting your choice was the noble thing to do, but it wasn't noble. It was giving up. We both gave up. But we're here now." His forehead touched hers, and she could feel his breath warm against her lips. "We're here, and we're being honest. And maybe that's enough to start over. Start over. Or start for real this time. No more hiding. No more pretending we don't feel what we feel. No more letting other people's expectations dictate our choices." His voice was low, intense, filled with a certainty that made her believe anything was possible. "I want to be with you, Amara. Not in secret. Not just when it's convenient. Not with one foot out the door in case things get complicated." "Things will get complicated," she said, but there was no fear in it anymore, just acknowledgement of reality. "I know. And we'll figure it out together." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes fully. "But first, I need to know if you want this as much as I do, because if you're going to run again, if you're going to let fear make your decisions, I need to know now." The question hung between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or burn down. 6 weeks ago, she would have chosen safety, chosen the familiar pain of wanting something she couldn't have over the terrifying vulnerability of reaching for it. But 6 weeks of missing him had taught her something about herself. She was braver than she'd thought, stronger than she'd believed, and worthy of the kind of love that felt too good to be true. "I want this," she said, her voice clear and certain. "I want you. I want us, whatever that looks like, whatever complications come with it." The smile that spread across his face was radiant, transforming his exhausted features into something that looked like pure joy. "Thank God," he breathed, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was everything their first one had been and more. Desperate with weeks of separation, tender with new understanding, electric with promise. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his sweater, her heart hammering against her ribs as he pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers again. "Detective Morrison will be here soon," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We need to deal with the break-in, figure out who's targeting me and why." "I know. But after that," he traced his thumb along her lower lip, and she shivered at the touch. "After that, I want to take you to dinner. Somewhere public this time. Somewhere everyone can see that you're with me, and I'm with you. People will talk. Let them." His eyes were fierce, protective, full of a determination that made her feel invincible. "Let them talk about how lucky I am. Let them wonder how someone like me managed to win someone like you. You have that backwards." "No," he said, his voice soft but absolute. "I really don't." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of car doors slamming echoed from the front of the house. Detective Morrison, arriving right on schedule to discuss security measures and potential threats. But for the first time since the break-in, Amara wasn't afraid. Whatever dangers they faced, whatever complications arose from their choice to be together, they would handle them as a team. "Ready?" Dominic asked, offering her his hand. She took it without hesitation, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones like coming home. "Ready," she said. And for the first time in her life, she truly was. The truth came wrapped in a manila envelope, delivered by Detective Morrison with the kind of careful professionalism that warned of unpleasant revelations. They sat in Dominic's office, now restored to its former order, as the detective spread photographs and documents across the mahogany desk. Amara had insisted on being present for the briefing, and Dominic hadn't argued. After everything they'd been through, after the choice they'd made to face complications together, there were no more secrets between them. "We found your laptop," Morrison began, sliding an evidence bag containing the familiar silver device across the desk. "Recovery team pulled it from a dumpster in Coral Gables, completely wiped clean. Professional job like we suspected." "Any leads on who took it?" Dominic asked, his hand finding Amara's under the table, a gesture of comfort that had become natural over the past 3 days. "Actually, yes. And that's where this gets interesting." Morrison opened a folder, revealing surveillance photos from various locations around Miami. "We've been tracking the individuals responsible, and it turns out this wasn't random corporate espionage." He laid out a series of photographs showing a well-dressed woman with dark hair entering and leaving various buildings around the city. In the final photo, she was clearly visible, stepping out of a black sedan in front of a downtown office building. Dominic went very still beside her. "I know her. Miranda Castellanos," Morrison confirmed, "your former business partner's ex-wife. According to our investigation, she's been systematically gathering information about your personal life and business operations for the past 6 months. Marcus," Dominic's voice was flat, emotionless, in a way that made Amara's chest tight with concern. "This is about Marcus Bronstein," Morrison nodded. "Your former partner seems to harbor significant resentment about the way your partnership ended. When his divorce became finalized last year, Ms. Castellanos approached him with a proposition. She would help him gather evidence of corporate malfeasance in exchange for a substantial financial settlement." "What kind of evidence?" Amara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "The kind that doesn't exist," Dominic said quietly, "because there hasn't been any malfeasance. Marcus and I had creative differences about the direction of the company. When we couldn't reconcile them, I bought out his shares at fair market value. It was completely legal, completely ethical, and completely documented. But Ms. Castellanos didn't know that," Morrison continued. "She was operating under the assumption that there were financial irregularities to be found. When the laptop search turned up nothing useful, she expanded her investigation to include your personal life. A chill ran down Amara's spine. My personal life. Morrison's expression grew more serious. She'd been tracking your movements, Miss Collins. Your work schedule, your home address, your sister's college applications. The break-in wasn't just about stealing business information, it was about gathering leverage. Leverage for what? Dominic's voice had taken on the hard edge she recognized from their early conversations, when he'd been protecting himself behind walls of professional distance. Blackmail, essentially. The plan was to document your relationship with Miss Collins and use it to suggest impropriety in your business dealings. A wealthy businessman taking advantage of his employee, even consensually, could be spun into a harassment scandal with the right legal representation. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Amara felt sick, imagining her private feelings turned into weapons, her choice to love Dominic twisted into something ugly and exploitative. But there's good news, Morrison added quickly. Ms. Castellanos made a critical error. She attempted to sell the information she'd gathered to a competitor of yours, Nexus Industries. Unfortunately for her, Nexus's CEO has been a family friend of yours for years. He immediately contacted your legal team. David called me yesterday, Dominic confirmed. Said someone had approached him with what they claimed was compromising information about my personal conduct. He wanted to give me a heads up before refusing to buy whatever they were selling. With that testimony and the evidence we've gathered, we have enough to file charges against both Ms. Castellanos and Mr. Braunstein for conspiracy, breaking and entering, and attempted extortion. Morrison began gathering the photos back into his folder. You're safe, both of you. This whole scheme has collapsed. Relief flooded through Amara so quickly it left her lightheaded. For days, she'd been carrying the fear that loving Dominic might put them both in danger. Now to learn that the danger had always been there, that it had nothing to do with her choices, and everything to do with someone else's greed and resentment, felt like being released from a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. What happens now? She asked. Legal proceedings, probably a civil suit for damages, definitely improved security measures, Morrison replied. But the immediate threat is over. You can both get back to your normal lives. After Morrison left, they sat in the quiet office, processing everything they'd learned. Dominic was staring out the window at the ocean, his expression thoughtful and distant. You're thinking about Marcus, Amara said. I am. He turned back to her, and she could see the hurt in his eyes despite his controlled expression. He was my friend. For 8 years he was one of my closest friends. I trusted him with everything. My business, my family, my dreams for what we could build together. People change, or maybe they show you who they really were all along. Maybe. He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. The ironic thing is, if he'd just asked me for help with his divorce settlement, with the legal fees, I would have given it to him, no questions asked. But that wouldn't have satisfied whatever he was really angry about. No, I don't think it would have. Dominic was quiet for a moment, then looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. Amara, I need you to know something. What Morrison said about the blackmail attempt, about them trying to spin our relationship into something inappropriate, I know it's not true. Do you? Because from the beginning, there's been this power imbalance between us. I'm your employer. I have more money, more social connections, more of everything that matters in this world. If you ever felt pressured, stop. She turned in her chair to face him fully. Dominic, look at me. Really, look at me. He did, his storm-grey eyes searching her face with the careful attention she'd come to love. Do I look like someone who can be pressured into anything? She asked. Do I seem like someone who would be here, in this office, holding your hand, if I didn't want to be? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No, you seem like someone who would probably punch me if I suggested you couldn't make your own decisions. Exactly. I chose this. I chose you. Not because you're wealthy or powerful, or because I felt like I had to, but because you make me laugh. Because you see me as more than just my circumstances. Because you made me want to be brave enough to reach for something I thought was impossible. Even though it's complicated. Especially because it's complicated. She squeezed his hand. Easy love isn't worth very much, is it? Anyone can fall for someone who's convenient, someone who fits perfectly into their existing life. But falling for someone who challenges everything you thought you knew about yourself, someone who makes you want to become better than you were, that's the kind of love that changes you. Is that what this is? Love. The question hung between them, huge and terrifying and wonderful. They danced around the word for weeks, implied it in a dozen different ways, but never said it directly. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. "I love you, Dominic Carter. I love your terrible jokes and your unexpected gentleness, and the way you look at me like I'm something precious. I love that you came home from halfway around the world because you were worried about my safety. I love that you're brave enough to fight for us even when everyone else thinks we don't make sense. I love you too." The words came out rough with emotion. "I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you challenge me to be better than I thought I could be. I love that you see past everything I have to who I actually am underneath it all." He stood, pulling her up with him, and suddenly they were kissing again, desperate and joyful and full of promises neither of them had been brave enough to make before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now?" she asked, echoing her earlier question to Morrison. "Now we figure out what our life looks like together. The real version, not the secret version or the careful version or the version where we pretend it's not serious." His eyes were bright with possibility. "Now we stop being afraid of what other people think and start building something that belongs to us." "That sounds perfect." "It sounds terrifying," he corrected with a grin, "but perfect too." Outside the window, the Miami sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about how to navigate their different worlds, new opportunities to choose love over fear. But tonight, they had truth, they had honesty, they had each other. And for the first time since a glass of red wine had brought them together, that felt like enough to build a future on. 2 years later, the morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Coconut Grove home painted everything in soft gold, the kind of light that made ordinary moments feel like small miracles. Amara stood at the kitchen island, wearing one of Dominic's Columbia University t-shirts and a pair of shorts. Her nursing school textbooks spread across the marble surface alongside her laptop and a half-finished cup of Cuban coffee. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she had a yellow highlighter tucked behind her ear, the picture of focused concentration that had become her signature look over the past 18 months. "Pharmacology exam tomorrow?" Dominic asked, emerging from their bedroom wearing running shorts and sneakers, his hair still mussed from sleep. "Pharmacology exam tomorrow," she confirmed, not looking up from her notes. "And if I don't pass it, I'm going to have to repeat the entire semester, which means delaying my clinical rotations, which means you're spiraling," he interrupted gently, moving behind her to press a kiss to the top of her head. "And forgetting that you've gotten perfect scores on every exam you've taken so far. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results," she muttered, but she leaned back against his chest anyway, accepting the comfort he offered. "No, but past performance does suggest that you're exactly as brilliant as I've been telling you since the day we met." His arms circled her waist, and she could feel his smile against her temple. "You're going to be an incredible nurse, Amara, the best Miami general has ever seen." She turned in his arms, studying his face in the morning light. 2 years together, and he still looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in the world. The intensity was still there, but it had been tempered by familiarity, deepened by the kind of intimacy that came from knowing someone's morning routine and their favorite way to be comforted after a bad day. "How did I get so lucky?" she asked, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I ask myself the same question every day." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Speaking of which, I have something to tell you." Something in his tone made her study his expression more carefully. There was excitement there and nervousness, and something that looked almost like mischief. "Good something or bad something?" "Good something. Great something, actually." He pulled out his phone, scrolling to an email. "Remember that nursing scholarship you applied for? The one for students from underserved communities who are pursuing careers in pediatric care?" Her heart stuttered. "The Healy Foundation Scholarship? Dominic, that's a full ride plus living expenses for my last year of school. There's no way I—" "You got it." His grin was radiant. "Full scholarship, plus a guaranteed position in the pediatric ICU at Miami Children's Hospital after graduation." The news hit her like a physical blow. She stared at the email on his phone, reading the same paragraph 3 times before the words finally sank in. Full scholarship, guaranteed position. Everything she'd dreamed of but never quite believed she deserved. "I can't— this is—" She looked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "This changes everything." "It changes nothing," he said firmly. "You earned this, Amara. Every bit of it. Your grades, your volunteer work, your essay about wanting to help children who grew up like you did. They saw what I've known all along, that you're going to change lives." She kissed him then, pouring 2 years of gratitude and love and wonder into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I need to call Kira," she said. "Call her later. Right now we're celebrating." He glanced at his running watch. "I was going to go for a run, but this seems more important." "Go," she insisted, pushing gently at his chest. "I need time to process this anyway. And I actually do need to study, scholarship or no scholarship." "You sure?" "I'm sure. Go run off some of that restless energy, and when you get back, we'll celebrate properly." After he left, Amara sank onto one of the bar stools, staring at the email on her own phone. 2 years ago, she'd been cleaning this same neighborhood's mansions, convinced that dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford. Now she was living in a house that overlooked the same bay she'd once only seen from other people's windows, pursuing a career that would let her help families like the one she'd grown up in. The journey hadn't been easy. Moving in together had required navigating questions from friends, family, and colleagues about their unconventional beginning. Amara had endured whispered conversations at nursing school about whether she'd earned her place or simply had advantages others didn't. Dominic had faced skepticism from business associates who questioned his judgment in mixing personal and professional relationships, but they'd weathered every storm together, growing stronger with each challenge overcome. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kira. "Stop studying and go kiss your billionaire boyfriend. It's Saturday morning." Amara smiled, typing back, "How did you know I was studying?" "Because you're always studying." Also, Dominic texted me the scholarship news. "I'm so proud of you I might actually cry, and you know I don't cry." "I might cry too. This is huge, Kira. You deserve huge things. You always have. I'm just glad you finally believe it." The exchange reminded Amara of how much had changed for both of them. Kira was thriving at FIU, double majoring in graphic design and business, already talking about graduate school and starting her own creative agency. She'd moved into the campus dorms the previous year, declaring herself ready for independence, but she still came by for dinner every Sunday, usually bringing laundry and stories about her latest romantic disasters. "Good morning, sunshine." Amara looked up to find Mrs. Chen standing in the doorway, carrying a tray with fresh fruit and what looked like homemade muffins. The older woman had become an unofficial part of their household, dropping by most weekends with food and opinions about everything, from Amara's study schedule to Dominic's workaholic tendencies. "Mrs. Chen, you didn't have to." "Of course I didn't have to. I wanted to." She set the tray on the counter, then studied Amara's face with the knowing expression that had become familiar over the years. "You heard about the scholarship. How do you always know everything before it happens?" "Because I've been watching that boy plan surprises for you since the day you first smiled at him." Mrs. Chen arranged the fruit with practiced efficiency. "He's been checking his email every hour for 2 weeks, waiting for that notification." The image of Dominic anxiously monitoring her scholarship application made Amara's chest warm with affection. "He didn't tell me he was nervous about it." "Of course he didn't. He didn't want to add to your stress." Mrs. Chen paused in her arrangements, meeting Amara's eyes. "That boy loves you more than his own breath, you know. Watching him learn how to put someone else's happiness before his own has been one of the great privileges of my life. I love him too, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I know you do, and that's why what I'm about to tell you won't come as a surprise." Something in her tone made Amara sit up straighter. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Chen reached into her purse, pulling out a small velvet box that made Amara's heart stop entirely. "He asked me to hold on to this until the right moment. Said he wanted everything else in your life to be settled first. School, career plans, your future security. He didn't want you to think he was trying to rush you or pressure you into anything." Amara stared at the box, her hands trembling as she reached for it. Inside, nestled in white satin, was the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen. A classic solitaire setting with a diamond that caught the morning light and threw rainbows across the kitchen counter. "There's an inscription," Mrs. Chen said softly. With shaking hands, Amara lifted the ring to read the delicate engraving inside the band. "For my brave girl, D." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. He'd remembered what he'd said to her on one of their first real dates, when she'd confessed her fears about pursuing nursing school. He'd called her brave then, and he'd been calling her brave ever since, until she'd finally started to believe it herself. "When?" she managed to ask. "Soon, I imagine. He's been carrying that ring around for 3 months, waiting for the perfect moment." Mrs. Chen smiled, reaching over to squeeze Amara's hand. "Though knowing him, he'll probably overthink it, until you have to propose to him instead." They both laughed at that, and Amara carefully placed the ring back in its box. Her future husband was out running through their neighborhood, probably planning some elaborate proposal that would be both romantic and thoughtful and completely unnecessary, because her answer had been yes since the day he'd asked her to trust him with her heart. 30 minutes later, she heard his key in the front door. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, sweaty and slightly out of breath, his running shirt clinging to his chest in a way that still made her pulse quicken after all this time. "How was your run?" she asked innocently. "Good. Productive. Gave me time to think about how we should celebrate your scholarship." He moved to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water. "I was thinking dinner at Gabriel's tonight. Seems appropriate given the history." "Sounds perfect." She waited until he'd finished drinking, then held up the velvet box. "But I think we might have more than one thing to celebrate." The bottle slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a plastic thud that neither of them noticed. His eyes went wide, then moved to Mrs. Chen, who was trying very hard to look innocent. "You gave it to her?" "The moment was right," Mrs. Chen said simply. "And you've been carrying that thing around long enough to wear a hole in your pocket." Dominic moved toward Amara slowly, as if approaching something fragile and precious. "I had a whole plan," he said. "Dinner, music, a speech about how you've changed my life in ways I never knew were possible." "I don't need a speech," Amara said, standing to meet him. "I just need you to ask me the question." He dropped to one knee right there in their kitchen, still wearing his sweaty running clothes, his hair a mess, and his eyes bright with emotion. "Amara Collins," he said, his voice rough with feeling, "will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and being proud of you and watching you change the world one patient at a time?" "Yes," she said, not even waiting for him to finish. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." The ring slid onto her finger like it had been made for her, and when Dominic stood to kiss her, Amara felt the same electricity she'd experienced that first night when he'd steadied her hand after the wine spill. Some things, she realized, never changed. They just grew deeper, richer, more essential with time. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too, brave girl." From somewhere behind them, Mrs. Chen was sniffling and muttering about young people being too impatient to wait for proper romantic settings, but Amara barely heard her. She was too busy looking at the ring on her finger, thinking about the scholarship that would launch her career, and marveling at how a life that had once felt small and limited had expanded to hold more joy than she'd ever thought possible. Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories began with the most ordinary moments: a spilled glass of wine, a purple orchid, a conversation about wilting flowers. Sometimes the distance between two worlds was smaller than it appeared, bridged by courage and honesty, and the simple decision to reach for what felt impossible. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, the fairy tale turned out to be real after all. Would you have the courage to love someone like that? Someone who challenges everything you thought you knew about your place in the world. Someone who makes you want to become braver than you ever imagined possible. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe love can truly bridge any gap? What would you have done in Amara's place? Your participation in the channel is very important, so please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.